Hello everyone, tonight we are drifting back to the opulent, yet often unforgiving, courts of 18th century Denmark, a place of powdered wigs, whispered secrets, and a young king whose mind was, shall we say, a rather unique and challenging kingdom all its own. Picture yourself stepping into a gilded palace, the air thick with the scent of beeswax polish and faint, expensive perfumes. Candles flicker, casting long, dancing shadows on walls adorned with portraits of stern-faced ancestors, their painted eyes seeming to follow your every move. You hear the distant strains of a harpsichord, a delicate melody that barely conceals the undercurrent of political maneuvering and social expectation that defined this era. You're about to walk in the shoes of Christian VII, and let me tell you, it's a journey that most of us, accustomed to our modern freedoms and mental health awareness, would find utterly bewildering. Frankly, given the pressures, the lack of understanding of mental health, and the sheer ruthlessness of courtly life, you'd be lucky to last a week, let alone navigate a reign. So, before you feel comfortable, please take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy what I do here. It really helps the channel, and it means I can keep unearthing these fascinating, often overlooked, corners of history for you. And, as always, I'd love to see where you're tuning in from and what time it is in your part of the world. It's always a thrill to see how far these stories travel. Now, let's turn off the lights, maybe get a fan going for some gentle white noise, and let's embark on tonight's journey together. You are born on a chilly January day in 1749, at Charlottenborg Palace in Copenhagen. A cannon salute booms across the city, announcing your arrival, Christian, by the grace of God, Prince of Denmark and Norway, the Wends and the Goths, Duke of Schleswig, Holstein, Stormarn, and Dithmarschen, Count of Oldenburg and Delmenhorst. Quite a mouthful, isn't it? It's a heavy mantle of titles, stitched together with centuries of royal lineage and the expectations of an entire kingdom, all placed upon your tiny, squirming shoulders. Your father is King Frederick V, a man known more for his hedonistic pursuits and love of a good party, perhaps a too good party, if court gossip is to be believed, than for his statesmanship. He's often described as good-natured but prone to melancholy and, shall we say, over-imbibing. Think of him as the kind of dad who means well but is often too caught up in his own drama to notice what's really going on. Your mother, Queen Louise, is a British princess, the daughter of King George II. She's seen as a stabilizing influence, a gentle and cultured woman who, bless her heart, does her best to navigate the complexities of the Danish court and her husband's erratic moods. From the very beginning, there's a certain fragility about you. You're not a robust infant, and hushed whispers in the palace corridors speculate about your delicate constitution. Early childhood in a royal palace of this era isn't exactly a walk in the park with swings and ice cream. It's a regimented existence, overseen by a legion of tutors, governors, and attendants, each with their own ideas about how a future king should be molded. Your primary guardian, Detlev Reventlow, is a stern and rather imposing figure, a man who believes in discipline, often of the rather harsh, physical kind. Historians still debate whether Reventlow's methods were simply typical of the era's rather brutal pedagogical standards or if they crossed a line into something more damaging, particularly for a child who already seemed different. You are an intelligent boy, quick to learn languages and possessed of a certain restless energy. But there are also unsettling signs. Fits of temper, strange pronouncements, and an apparent delight in causing minor chaos. One apocryphal story, perhaps a bit of courtly exaggeration but telling nonetheless, suggests you once released a flock of prized songbirds from the Queen's aviary simply to see the ensuing panic. It's the kind of prank that might get a modern kid a stern talking to and maybe their tablet taken away. For a future king, it's filed away as another piece of anecdotal evidence in the growing ledger of your peculiarities. Your father, King Frederick, when he's lucid enough to pay attention, is reportedly either amused or deeply troubled by your behavior, with little middle ground. He's not exactly a model of stability himself, often oscillating between bouts of drunken revelry and periods of crushing despondency. It's like trying to learn the rules of a game from a referee who keeps changing them mid-play. Tragedy strikes early. When you are just 2 years old, your mother, Queen Louise, dies. It's a devastating blow. Though you are too young to fully comprehend the loss, her absence removes a crucial source of warmth and stability from your life. Your father, already prone to melancholy, spirals further. He remarries a year later to Juliana Maria of Brunswick-Wolfenbüttel. Your stepmother is a very different creature from Louise. She's politically astute, deeply conservative, and, as you'll discover later, fiercely protective of her own son, your half-brother Frederick, born in 1753. She's not exactly the warm, fuzzy maternal type. Imagine a stepmother who's always got her eye on the main chance, and you're not it. Your education continues, a strange mix of Enlightenment ideals and old-fashioned discipline. You learn Latin, French, German, mathematics, and the arts of warfare, all considered essential for a future ruler. Yet, your tutors note a worrying lack of concentration, a tendency to flit from one subject to another, and an unnerving intensity that can switch to complete disinterest in a heartbeat. There are tales of you developing obsessions, fixating on a particular subject or person with an almost manic fervor, only to discard them just as quickly. It's said you once became so engrossed in the mechanics of a particular clock that you dismantled it piece by piece, then lost all interest in reassembling it, much to the horror of the royal clockmaker. It wasn't malicious, not exactly, but it was unsettling. The court itself is a viper's nest of factions and ambitions. Nobles vie for influence, whispering in the king's ear, trying to position themselves for power and patronage. Your father, as his health declines due to his lifestyle, becomes increasingly susceptible to these influences. You are growing up in an environment where trust is a rare commodity, and genuine affection is even scarcer. Everyone has an angle. It's a world where a misplaced word or an ill-judged alliance can have serious consequences. It's no wonder you develop a certain performative aspect to your personality, learning to play the roles expected of you, even if you don't quite understand or agree with them. The pressure to be a king-in-waiting is immense, a constant, grinding weight. You are paraded at court functions, expected to be charming and dignified, even as a storm of confusion and anxiety might be raging inside you. You're just a kid, really, but you're also a symbol, a piece in a much larger game, and the adults around you often seem to forget the former in their focus on the latter. The line between your personal identity and your public persona begins to blur almost before you can even spell identity crisis. And so, you stumble through these formative years, a young prince walking a tightrope strung across a chasm of expectation and internal turmoil. The weight of your future role feels less like a noble calling and more like an ill-fitting suit, itchy and constricting. The stern lessons from Reventlow, the distant sorrow of your father, and the watchful, calculating eyes of your stepmother, Juliana Maria, all contribute to the strange symphony of your upbringing. You are surrounded by people, yet profoundly alone. Then, in the cold January of 1766, when you are just shy of your 17th birthday, your father, King Frederick V, finally succumbs to his years of excess. He breathes his last, and just like that, the crown, heavy and ornate, is yours. You are now King Christian VII. Imagine being 17, still trying to figure out who you are, and suddenly you're the absolute ruler of Denmark and Norway. No pressure, right? It's like being handed the keys to a very large, very complicated kingdom with a user manual written in a language you only half understand. Your coronation is a grand affair, full of pomp and circumstance, but even amidst the solemn oaths and the cheering crowds, there are whispers. Whispers about your fitness to rule, about your moods, your strange intensity. You are young, inexperienced, and, let's be honest, already known for being a bit of a wild card. The early days of your reign are chaotic. You're eager to assert your authority, but your attempts often come across as impulsive and ill-considered. You dismiss trusted ministers one day, only to try and rehire them the next. You issue decrees that seem to come from nowhere, then forget about them just as quickly. The court is in a state of constant anxiety, never quite sure what the young king will do next. It's like living with a roommate who rearranges the furniture every night while you're sleeping, disorienting and slightly alarming. It is decided by your advisors, the men who are now scrambling to manage you and the kingdom, that a grand tour of Europe is in order. This is a classic 18th century move for young noblemen, a sort of finishing school on wheels, intended to expose you to different cultures, broaden your horizons, and perhaps, just perhaps, instill some much-needed maturity and diplomatic polish. The plan is for you to visit Germany, the Netherlands, England, and France. You are to meet other royals, inspect institutions, absorb art and science, and generally behave like a sophisticated monarch in training. That's the plan, anyway. What actually happens is somewhat different. You set off in 1768 with a suitably large entourage, including advisors meant to keep you on the straight and narrow. But from the outset, it's clear that you view this tour less as an educational experience and more as an opportunity for, shall we say, unrestrained personal expression. Your behavior becomes increasingly erratic and scandalous. In England, you make quite an impression, though perhaps not the one your advisors were hoping for. You visit Oxford and Cambridge, where you are awarded honorary degrees, a standard courtesy for visiting royalty, but your attention span during learned discussions is notoriously short. One mainstream historical fact is your meeting with prominent intellectuals like Dr. Samuel Johnson and the philosopher Jean-Jacques Rousseau, though the Rousseau meeting was in France. Johnson, never one to mince words, later reportedly remarked on your frivolity. A polite 18th century way of saying you were a bit of a handful. The nights are where you truly shine, or rather, where your reputation for debauchery ignites. You and your close companions, particularly Conrad Hulk, your master of the royal hunt and a notorious enabler of your worst impulses, dive headfirst into the less savory aspects of London nightlife. There are reports of you frequenting taverns, engaging in brawls, and visiting brothels. You seem to delight in shocking polite society, in breaking every conceivable rule of royal decorum. Imagine the King of Denmark getting into a fistfight with a group of sailors in a dimly lit pub. It's not exactly diplomatic outreach. One rather quirky tidbit from this period, possibly apocryphal but widely circulated, involved you and your companions dressing up as common laborers and rampaging through the streets, smashing windows and generally causing a ruckus until the local watchman intervened, blissfully unaware they were arresting a king. The diplomatic fallout from that little escapade, if true, must have been a nightmare for your long-suffering ministers. Sorry about the broken windows, it was just our king letting off some steam. Historians still debate whether your actions on the Grand Tour were primarily a result of your burgeoning mental illness, a desperate cry for freedom from the suffocating constraints of your royal role, or simply the reckless abandon of a powerful young man with too much freedom and not enough guidance. It was likely a potent cocktail of all three. Your attendants are in a state of perpetual panic, trying to clean up your messes, both literal and metaphorical, and maintain some semblance of diplomatic propriety. They write frantic letters back to Copenhagen, full of coded language and despairing sighs. Your visit to France is similarly chaotic. You are received at the court of King Louis XV at Versailles, a place that practically invented opulence and rigid etiquette. You, however, seem determined to be the bull in this very delicate china shop. You attend operas and balls, but your behavior is often inappropriate, loud, disruptive, and prone to sudden, inexplicable mood swings. You might be charming and witty one moment, then sullen and aggressive the next. It's said you developed a particular fascination with the more violent forms of entertainment, like public executions, which you attended with an unsettling enthusiasm. While a public fascination with such events wasn't entirely uncommon, your reported glee was noted as excessive. Throughout this grand, expensive, and increasingly disastrous tour, you are spending money like it's going out of style. The Danish treasury is footing the bill for your escapades, and the costs are mounting. Back home, the government is struggling, and news of your behavior abroad is met with a mixture of embarrassment and dismay. You're supposed to be building alliances, impressing foreign powers. Instead, you're building a reputation as the royal problem child of Europe. Your companions, like Hulk, seem to encourage your wilder side, perhaps finding it amusing, or perhaps using it to their own advantage, keeping you distracted while they pursue their own agendas. It's a classic case of the fox guarding the henhouse, if the fox was also your drinking buddy and partner in crime. The tour is eventually cut short. Even your most indulgent advisors realize that the damage to your reputation, and Denmark's, is becoming too great. You return to Copenhagen not as a more polished and worldly monarch, but as a figure of even greater concern. The Grand Tour, intended to shape you into a king, has instead revealed the depths of your instability and your almost compulsive need to defy expectations. The experience seems to have exacerbated your existing tendencies, leaving you more volatile and less predictable than ever. You've seen the wider world, but the most important journey, the one into understanding and managing your own mind, remains hopelessly out of reach. So, you're back in Copenhagen, the Grand Tour a chaotic memory, a highlight reel of diplomatic near misses and decidedly unregal behavior. Your reputation precedes you, and not in a good way. The Danish court is on edge, wondering what this new, even more unpredictable version of their king will bring. Your advisors, the ones who haven't resigned in despair or aged a decade during your European jaunt, are desperate for some semblance of stability. And in the 18th century, for a young king, stability often meant one thing: marriage. A queen. An heir. The continuation of the dynasty. It's the royal equivalent of your parents hoping a serious relationship will make you finally settle down and get a proper job. The groundwork for your marriage had actually been laid before your little European adventure, a political alliance much like your own parents' union. The chosen bride is your cousin, Princess Caroline Mathilde of Great Britain, sister of King George III. She's young, only 15 when she arrives in Denmark in November 1766, a few months after your ascension but before the full notoriety of your grand tour has cemented itself. Imagine being 15, plucked from your home, your family, your language, and shipped off to a foreign land to marry a king you've never met. It's the stuff of fairy tales, or perhaps, more accurately, a recipe for a very complicated life. She's reportedly pretty, lively, and, at least initially, hopeful. Poor girl. If only she had a TripAdvisor review for marrying erratic 18th century Danish kings. Her arrival in Copenhagen is met with the requisite fanfare, cheering crowds, lavish ceremonies, and a kingdom eager to embrace their new queen. You meet her for the first time amidst this whirlwind of public expectation. What does she see? A young king, yes, but one whose eyes might hold a flicker of something unsettling, whose charm can turn on a dime to cold indifference or outright bizarre behavior. And what do you see? Another obligation, another person expecting something from you, another cog in the relentless machine of monarchy. Perhaps for a moment, you see a pretty face, a potential ally, a glimmer of something new. But your internal world is already so crowded, so noisy. The wedding takes place with all due solemnity. You are now a married man, a king with a queen. The kingdom breathes a collective, if slightly hesitant, sigh of relief. Maybe this will be the thing that calms you, that grounds you. But from the very beginning, the marriage is a disaster. You are, to put it mildly, not an attentive or affectionate husband. Your behavior towards Caroline Mathilde is erratic, ranging from cold neglect to public humiliation. There are accounts of you openly mocking her, making crude jokes at her expense, and flaunting your disinterest in her company. It's incredibly cruel, and for a young woman in a foreign court, completely isolated, it must have been terrifying. She's trying to navigate a new culture, a new language, and a husband who seems to operate on a different plane of reality. It's like being cast in a play where your co-star keeps improvising wildly, and all the stage directions are in a language you barely speak. One mainstream historical fact is that despite the dysfunction, an heir is produced relatively quickly. Crown Prince Frederick, the future King Frederick VI, is born in January 1768, just over a year into the marriage. This is, of course, a cause for national celebration. The dynasty is secure. Hooray! But it does little to improve the actual relationship between you and Caroline Mathilde. If anything, your behavior worsens. You spend less and less time with her, preferring the company of your rowdy companions, like the aforementioned Conrad Hulk and the even more infamous Count Enevold Brandt. Brandt is a particularly interesting character, a courtier known for his wit but also his arrogance, and for a while, he becomes one of your closest, and most destructive, confidants. You and Brandt reportedly engaged in all sorts of juvenile and sometimes brutal games, including physical altercations where you would beat each other, supposedly for amusement. Historians still debate the exact nature of these interactions. Were they truly mutual, a sign of your deteriorating mental state, or a complex power dynamic at play? Whatever the truth, it's deeply disturbing. Caroline Mathilde, meanwhile, is left increasingly alone and miserable. She's young, vivacious, and intelligent, but she's trapped in a gilded cage. The Danish court is a stuffy, conservative place, and she, with her English upbringing, finds its etiquette stifling. She's an outsider, and your blatant disregard for her makes her an easy target for court gossips and political schemers. She tries to create a small circle of friends, but trust is a dangerous commodity. One quirky, though sad, detail often mentioned is her love for horseback riding, which she pursued with a passion that was considered somewhat unseemly for a queen in the formal Danish court. It was one of her few escapes, a way to feel a sense of freedom in a life that was otherwise utterly constrained. Think of her galloping away, trying to outrun the oppressive atmosphere of the palace, if only for a few hours. Your mental state continues its downward spiral. You are plagued by paranoia, by auditory hallucinations, voices that whisper commands or fill your head with disturbing thoughts. You develop strange compulsions, fixations on trivial details. You might spend hours meticulously arranging objects, only to fly into a rage if they are disturbed. Public appearances become increasingly fraught. You might burst into inappropriate laughter during a solemn ceremony or deliver rambling, incoherent speeches. Your ministers are in a state of constant damage control, trying to interpret your pronouncements, to shield you from public scrutiny, and, most importantly, to govern the country despite their king. It's like trying to run a multinational corporation when the CEO communicates exclusively through interpretive dance and a magic 8-ball. Caroline Mathilde, isolated and unhappy, retreats further into herself. The bright, hopeful princess who arrived in Denmark is fading, replaced by a lonely, disillusioned queen. She has her son, Frederick, but even her access to him is sometimes controlled by the court and by your unpredictable whims. The early promise of a royal marriage, the hope for stability and companionship, has dissolved into a bitter reality of neglect, cruelty, and the terrifying spectacle of your unraveling mind. She is a prisoner of her position, just as you are, in your own way, a prisoner of your throne and your illness. The stage is being set for even more dramatic and tragic events, as new figures begin to enter this fractured royal household, figures who will see opportunity in the chaos. The atmosphere in the Danish court is thick with unspoken anxieties and the cloying scent of decay, not of physical decay, but the decay of order, of royal dignity. You are the epicenter of this slow-motion implosion, your mood swinging like a broken weather vane in a hurricane. Your marriage to Caroline Mathilde is a hollow charade, a source of constant misery for her and a matter of public record for its dysfunction. Your son, Crown Prince Frederick, is the kingdom's hope, but he's just a child, oblivious to the psychological drama swirling around his parents. The government limps along, ministers trying to interpret your garbled intentions or, more often, simply governing around you. It's a precarious situation, a power vacuum just waiting to be filled. And as often happens in such vacuums, new, ambitious figure is about to step into the light, or rather, into the long shadow cast by your troubled reign. His name is Johann Friedrich Struensee. He's a German physician, an intellectual, and a man deeply influenced by the Enlightenment ideals sweeping across Europe, ideas about reason, reform, and the rights of man. He initially comes into your orbit as a physician hired to accompany you on that infamous grand tour. Remember that chaotic trip? Struensee was there, in the background, observing, perhaps taking notes not just on your physical ailments but on your mental state and the power dynamics of your entourage. He's intelligent, articulate, and possesses a calm, confident demeanor that must have stood in stark contrast to the often frenzied atmosphere surrounding you. He's not a nobleman by birth, which sets him apart from the traditional courtiers, but he has a keen mind and, as it turns out, a remarkable talent for ingratiating himself with those in power. After the grand tour, Struensee manages to secure a more permanent position at court, officially as your personal physician. This is a mainstream historical fact. Struensee's initial appointment was as royal physician in 1769. At first, his influence is subtle. He speaks your language, not just German, but the language of your anxieties. Unlike others who might approach you with fear or exasperation, Struensee approaches you with a physician's calm, a show of understanding. He listens to your rambling monologues, to your paranoid fears, and he doesn't dismiss them out of hand. He seems to possess an uncanny ability to soothe your agitations, to bring moments of clarity, or at least, moments of reduced chaos. Imagine him as the 18th century equivalent of a very charismatic, if entirely unqualified and dangerously ambitious, therapist. So, Your Majesty, these invisible squirrels throwing acorns of discontent, tell me more. He gains your trust, a commodity you don't distribute easily. He becomes a confidant, one of the few people whose presence you not only tolerate but actively seek. He accompanies you on your bizarre nocturnal outings, but unlike Hulk or Brandt who seem to revel in the mayhem, Struensee positions himself as a steadying influence, or so it appears. He's clever. He doesn't directly challenge your delusions, but he subtly redirects your energies. He engages your intellect, discussing philosophy and the new Enlightenment ideas. For a mind like yours, restless and often starved of genuine intellectual stimulation, this is a powerful lure. Slowly, methodically, Struensee begins to isolate you from other influences. Courtiers who displease him find themselves out of favor. Ministers who challenge his growing power find their access to you restricted. He becomes the gatekeeper. If you want to speak to the king, you go through Struensee. If the king has an announcement, it's often Struensee who delivers or interprets it. It's a masterful consolidation of power, all achieved through the careful management of one very unpredictable monarch. And then there's the Queen, Caroline Mathilde. She is, as you recall, profoundly unhappy, isolated, and longing for any kind of intellectual or emotional connection. Struensee, with his modern ideas, his intelligence, and his apparent sympathy for her plight, is a breath of fresh air in the stuffy, judgmental Danish court. He treats her not just as a queen, a dynastic vessel, but as a woman, an individual. He speaks to her about literature, about art, about the need for reform. He encourages her to take a more active role, to break free from the constraints that have made her so miserable. It's a seductive message for someone in her position. A particularly quirky, or perhaps telling, anecdote about Struensee's early influence involves his approach to your son, the young Crown Prince Frederick. The prince was being raised in a rather rigid, old-fashioned manner. Struensee, championing Enlightenment ideas about child-rearing, think Rousseau, advocated for more freedom, more fresh air, simpler clothes, and a more natural upbringing. He even vaccinated the prince against smallpox, a relatively new and controversial procedure at the time, which was successful and greatly boosted his standing, particularly with Caroline Mathilde. It was seen as progressive, caring, and it directly benefited her beloved child. This success with young Frederick, a clear demonstration of his modern methods yielding positive results, was a significant factor in cementing the Queen's trust in him. The exact point at which Struensee's relationship with Caroline Mathilde crossed the line from physician and confidant to something more intimate is a subject that historians still debate. Was it a calculated move on Struensee's part to consolidate his power? Was it a genuine emotional connection born out of shared intellectual interests and mutual sympathy in a difficult environment? Or was it a desperate act by a lonely queen seeking affection and agency? Likely, it was a complex mixture of all these things. What is undeniable is that they became incredibly close. They spent hours together, discussing not just personal matters but affairs of state. Struensee found in her an intelligent ally, someone who shared his reformist zeal. And she found in him a champion, someone who valued her intellect and offered her a path out of her misery and isolation. You, King Christian, seem almost oblivious to this burgeoning intimacy, or perhaps, in your own world, you simply don't care, or even condone it. There are theories that you were relieved to have someone else manage the Queen, to take that particular burden off your shoulders. Struensee, after all, was also managing you, keeping your demons somewhat at bay, making your life more tolerable. If he made the Queen happier and less of a problem, then perhaps, in your fractured logic, it was all for the best. Or perhaps Struensee skillfully manipulated you into accepting the situation. She's much calmer now, isn't she, Your Majesty? My new conversation therapy is working wonders for her nerves, and mine. The physician's shadow is now cast not just over you, but over the Queen, and through both of you, over the entire Kingdom of Denmark. The German doctor, once a relatively obscure figure, is rapidly becoming the most powerful man in the country. He holds the king's mind in one hand and the queen's heart in the other. It's a meteoric rise, built on charisma, intelligence, ambition, and the profound vulnerabilities of a king and queen trapped in a gilded cage. The stage is set for a revolution, not of arms, but of ideas, all orchestrated by this remarkable, and ultimately, tragically flawed, individual. So there you are, King Christian VII, nominally the absolute ruler of Denmark and Norway, but in reality, you're increasingly a passenger in your own reign. Johann Friedrich Struensee, the charismatic German doctor, has become your indispensable companion, your interpreter, well, let's just say he's the guy running the royal show. He's managed to soothe some of the more violent storms in your mind, or at least channel your erratic energies in ways that suit his purposes. And he has captured the heart and mind of your lonely queen, Caroline Mathilde. Together, Struensee and Caroline Mathilde, with you as the official, rubber-stamping authority, are about to turn Denmark upside down. It's like they've been given the keys to the kingdom and a dog-eared copy of Enlightenment for Dummies, and they're ready to make some serious changes. This period, roughly from 1770 to early 1772, is astonishing for the sheer volume and radical nature of the reforms pushed through by Struensee. Using his complete influence over you, he effectively becomes the de facto ruler. You sign the decrees, sometimes in moments of lucidity, sometimes perhaps just to make the noise in your head stop, or because Struensee, with his calm, persuasive voice, tells you it's a good idea. And Caroline Mathilde, now deeply enamored with Struensee and his vision of a modern, enlightened Denmark, enthusiastically supports his agenda. She sees him as a savior, not just for her personally, but for the kingdom. The reforms come thick and fast, a dizzying torrent of new laws and regulations aimed at dismantling the old, creaking structures of Danish society and government. Struensee is a man in a hurry, driven by a genuine belief in Enlightenment principles but perhaps also by a dawning awareness that his window of opportunity might be perilously short. One of his first major moves is to guarantee freedom of the press and expression. This is a truly radical step for its time, a cornerstone of Enlightenment thought. Suddenly, pamphlets, newspapers, and books can be published without prior censorship. Imagine the shockwaves this sends through the conservative Danish establishment, who are used to controlling the flow of information. It's like taking the parental controls off the entire kingdom's internet overnight. The result is an explosion of printed material, some of it high-minded philosophical debate, much of it scurrilous gossip, criticism of the government, and even personal attacks on Struensee and the Queen themselves. It's a bold move, but it also unleashes forces that will later contribute to his downfall. Struensee then turns his attention to the bureaucracy. He streamlines government departments, abolishes sinecures, those cushy jobs for nobles that involve little work but lots of pay, sort of like a no-show job with a fancy title, and fires a whole raft of officials he deems incompetent or resistant to his reforms. He centralizes power, creating a cabinet system where he is the dominant figure. This is a mainstream historical fact. Struensee effectively abolished the Danish Council of State in 1771, concentrating power in his own hands through cabinet orders issued in the king's name. This makes the government more efficient, in theory, but it also alienates a huge number of powerful people who have just lost their jobs, their influence, and their comfortable perches on the gravy train. His reforms touch almost every aspect of Danish life. He tackles corruption in the legal system, introduces measures to improve sanitation and public health in Copenhagen, which, like many 18th century cities, was a pretty fragrant place, and not in a good way, and reorganizes the university. He even tries to reform the Foundling Hospital, reflecting Enlightenment concerns for social welfare. He's essentially trying to drag Denmark, kicking and screaming, into the modern age. Many of these reforms were, on paper, incredibly progressive and forward-thinking. He reduces peasant labor obligations, a step towards ending serfdom. He curtails the privileges of the nobility. He tries to simplify the tax system. One particularly quirky, and for its time, quite revolutionary, reform was the abolition of torture as a means of interrogation. This might seem like a no-brainer to us, but in 18th century Europe, torture was still a recognized, if brutal, part of the judicial process. Struensee, guided by Enlightenment thinkers like Cesare Beccaria who argued against cruel and unusual punishments, saw it as barbaric and unreliable. This humane reform, however, was just one more thing that horrified the traditionalists, who probably thought, how are we supposed to get a good, solid confession without a bit of thumbscrewing? The system will collapse. Of course, not everyone is thrilled with this whirlwind of change. The Danish nobility, whose power and privileges are being systematically dismantled, are furious. The clergy are scandalized by the secular tone of many of the reforms and by the open secret of Struensee's affair with the Queen. Conservative elements in society see him as a dangerous foreign upstart, an atheist. He was more of a deist, but why let facts get in the way of good outrage, and a social climber who has bewitched their king and queen? Historians still debate how much popular support Struensee actually had. Were the common people genuinely enthusiastic about these changes, or were they mostly confused and alarmed by the rapid pace and the perceived attack on traditional values? It's hard to say definitively, as the common voice is often the hardest to hear in historical records. You, King Christian, are the official face of this revolution. Your signature is on every decree. But it's an open secret that Struensee is the one pulling the strings. Sometimes, you are reportedly lucid and even enthusiastic about the reforms, discussing them intelligently with Struensee. At other times, you are completely disengaged, lost in your own chaotic inner world, signing whatever is put in front of you. There are accounts of you gleefully shouting, "Struensee is king," or participating in charades where he plays the ruler. It's all very strange and deeply unsettling for those who witness it. The Danish court, once a model of decorum, now feels like it's being run by a committee of one, with a king who's more of a mascot than a monarch. Caroline Mathilde, for her part, is thriving in this new atmosphere, at least initially. She feels empowered, involved, and intellectually stimulated. She presides over a more relaxed and informal court, shunning the stiff Danish etiquette she so despised. She rides horses astride like a man, wears less restrictive clothing, and openly champions Struensee and his policies. She even has a daughter, Princess Louise Augusta, born in July 1771. And here's where the whispers become shouts, because it's widely, and almost certainly correctly, believed that Louise Augusta is Struensee's child, not yours. While you officially acknowledge her as your daughter, the resemblance to the German doctor is said to be uncanny. The scandal is enormous, though mostly spoken of in hushed tones, at least until the dam of censorship fully breaks. Struensee, for all his intelligence and reforming zeal, is also politically naive and increasingly arrogant. He makes little effort to build alliances or to placate those he alienates. He seems to believe that as long as he has you and the Queen on his side, he is untouchable. He underestimates the deep resentment brewing beneath the surface, the potent combination of outraged morality, wounded pride, and political ambition that is coalescing against him. The Danish spring of enlightenment, so rapid and so radical, is heading for a very abrupt and brutal winter. While Struensee is busy redesigning Denmark from the top down, issuing decrees faster than a celebrity chef can say, revolutionary new recipe, a storm of discontent is gathering just beneath the glossy surface of his enlightened administration. You, King Christian, are often lost in the labyrinth of your own mind, sometimes cheerleading the changes, sometimes completely detached, leaving Struensee and Caroline Mathilde to navigate the increasingly choppy waters. They are the public faces of this new era, a German doctor wielding unprecedented power and an English-born queen openly defying convention. And let me tell you, in the conservative, hierarchical world of 18th century Danish nobility, this does not go down well. It's like bringing a vegan food truck to a national barbecue competition. The locals are not amused. The whispers start subtly at first, in the dimly lit corridors of Christiansborg Palace, over clandestine cups of tea in aristocratic drawing rooms, and in pointedly unanswered invitations to court events. Remember that freedom of the press Struensee championed? Well, it's a double-edged sword. While some pamphlets praise the new dawn of reason, many others are filled with venomous attacks, caricatures, and thinly veiled accusations against the German interloper and the adulterous queen. The very tool Struensee used to promote enlightenment is now being wielded to sharpen the knives of his enemies. It's a classic case of be careful what you wish for, especially if it involves printing presses and angry nobles. Who are these disgruntled folks, you ask? Well, it's quite a coalition of the cheesed off. Leading the charge, albeit often from the shadows, is your stepmother, Queen Dowager Juliana Maria. Remember her? The politically astute, deeply conservative woman who was never exactly your biggest fan, and even less a fan of Caroline Mathilde. Juliana Maria sees Struensee's reforms as an affront to everything a monarchy should stand for, tradition, order, and the divinely ordained privileges of the aristocracy. Plus, she has her own son, your half-brother Prince Frederick, to think about. In her eyes, Struensee and his radical agenda, not to mention his scandalous relationship with the Queen, are not just bad for Denmark, they're a threat to her Frederick's future prospects. She's the patient, calculating type, playing the long game, and she's gathering allies. One of her key allies is Ove Heg Guldberg, a theologian and historian who will later become a dominant political figure. Guldberg is everything Struensee is not, deeply Danish, staunchly conservative, and a master of navigating the intricacies of court politics. He views Struensee as a dangerous foreign radical, a destroyer of Danish values and Lutheran piety. He's a skilled propagandist, framing the struggle not just as a political battle but as a fight for the very soul of Denmark. He's not just whispering, he's articulating a coherent, powerful counter-narrative to Struensee's Enlightenment project. Then there's the gaggle of dismissed officials and disgruntled nobles. These are the people whose cushy jobs Struensee abolished, whose ancestral privileges he curtailed, whose advice he ignored. They've lost power, income, and, perhaps most importantly, face. And there's nothing quite like a humiliated nobleman with too much time on his hands to stir up trouble. They see Struensee not as a reformer, but as an arrogant, power-hungry commoner who has usurped their rightful place. The fact that he's German only adds fuel to the fire, tapping into a vein of xenophobia that's never far from the surface. He's not even from here, and he's telling us how to run things. The audacity. And, of course, there's the scandal. The affair between Struensee and Caroline Mathilde is the worst-kept secret in Copenhagen. Her pregnancy and the birth of Princess Louise Augusta, who everyone knows is Struensee's daughter, is the ultimate affront. This isn't just a political misstep, it's a moral outrage, a stain on the honor of the monarchy, and a delicious piece of gossip that titillates and horrifies in equal measure. Historians still debate the extent to which the public moral outrage was genuinely felt versus being skillfully inflamed by Struensee's political opponents. It was likely a potent mix of both. But in a society that prized decorum and public virtue, at least outwardly, the flagrant nature of the affair provided powerful ammunition for those who wanted Struensee gone. The atmosphere at court becomes thick with intrigue. Plots are hatched in hushed tones. Secret meetings take place. Letters with coded messages are exchanged. It's like a spy thriller, but with more powdered wigs and fewer exploding pens. Struensee, for all his intelligence, seems remarkably blind to the growing danger. He's confident, perhaps overly so, in your support, King Christian, and in the loyalty of the Queen. He dismisses the grumblings as the inevitable complaints of those resistant to progress. He continues to issue decrees, to centralize his power, perhaps believing that the sheer force of his reforms will sweep away all opposition. He even disbands the royal guard, a move seen by some as a sign of his dictatorial ambition, and by others as a monumentally stupid decision that leaves him vulnerable. It's like firing your own bodyguards because you think everyone loves you. Caroline Mathilde, too, seems caught up in the heady rush of reform and her relationship with Struensee. She has found a measure of happiness and purpose she never had before. She champions his causes, embraces the changes, and perhaps doesn't fully appreciate the depth of the animosity they are stirring up. Or maybe she does, but feels there's no turning back. She's all in. One quirky, apocryphal detail that sometimes surfaces in popular accounts is the story of a prophecy circulating at the time, perhaps planted by Struensee's enemies, foretelling the downfall of a foreign usurper who would lead the kingdom to ruin through an ungodly alliance with a queen. Whether this specific prophecy was a real thing or a later embellishment, it captures the superstitious and fearful undertones that were being exploited by the opposition. They weren't just fighting a political battle, they were, in their own minds, battling dark forces. The conspirators grow bolder. They know that to remove Struensee, they need your royal authority, King Christian. But how to get it when you are so clearly under Struensee's sway? They need to catch you at a moment of lucidity, or perhaps a moment of heightened paranoia they can manipulate. They need to convince you that Struensee is not your savior, but your betrayer. The plan begins to solidify, a swift, decisive action, a coup d'état to arrest Struensee, the Queen, and their key supporters. The stakes are incredibly high. If they succeed, they save Denmark, as they see it. If they fail, it's treason, and the consequences would be dire. The air in Copenhagen is electric with unspoken tension. Everyone knows something is about to break. The tension in Copenhagen has reached a fever pitch. It's like the air before a massive thunderstorm, heavy and crackling with an unseen energy. Struensee, still radiating that confident, almost reckless aura of the untouchable reformer, continues his work, seemingly oblivious or perhaps defiantly ignoring the daggers being sharpened in the shadows. Queen Caroline Mathilde remains his steadfast ally, her fate inextricably linked with his. You, King Christian, are the wild card, the key to unlocking the coup that Queen Dowager Juliana Maria, of Hesse-Goldberg, and their cabal of disgruntled nobles are meticulously planning. They've been biding their time, waiting for the perfect moment, the perfect alignment of your often misaligned mental state with their desperate ambitions. That moment arrives in the icy depths of a Danish winter, specifically the night of January 16th, leading into the early morning of January 17, 1772. A masked ball is being held at court, one of those glittering, slightly decadent affairs that were common at the time. Imagine the scene, flickering candlelight, elaborate costumes, music playing, wine flowing. Anonymity, or the illusion of it, hangs in the air. It's the perfect backdrop for intrigue. Struensee and Caroline Mathilde are present, perhaps feeling a little too secure amidst the revelry. They dance, they mingle, unaware that this is their last night of freedom, their last night of power. It's the ultimate, enjoy it while it lasts, moment, only they don't know it is about to dramatically and permanently last. As the ball winds down in the pre-dawn hours, and weary, masked guests begin to drift away, the conspirators make their move. This is it. Go time. Led by figures like General Hans Henrik von Eichstätt and Colonel George Ludwig von Kohlerbanner, who have managed to secure the loyalty of key military units. Remember Struensee's rather ill-advised disbanding of the Royal Guard? Yeah, that's coming back to bite him. The plotters head for your chambers, King Christian. Their primary objective, to get your signature on the arrest warrants for Struensee, Caroline Mathilde, and their closest associates, including Count Enevold Brandt, your former brutal playmate who had also risen high with Struensee. Imagine being woken from whatever restless sleep you manage these days. Your room is suddenly filled with stern-faced men in uniform, their expressions grim, their voices urgent. Juliana Maria, your stepmother, is there, her face a mask of determined gravity. Goldberg, the theologian, is likely present too, perhaps offering solemn justifications for what is about to happen. They present you with papers, arrest warrants, and they begin to bombard you with accusations against Struensee. They tell you he's a traitor, that he's usurping your power, that he's dishonored the Queen and the kingdom, that he plans to depose you, maybe even harm you. Historians still debate precisely what was said and how your signature was obtained. Were you in a state of paranoid delusion that they skillfully exploited? Did they convince you of a genuine threat? Or were you simply overwhelmed, confused, and pressured into signing by the sheer force of their presence and the urgency of their demands? Perhaps they even physically guided your hand. Just sign here, Your Majesty, it's for the good of the kingdom, and for your own good, of course. Think of it as an extreme form of pest control. Whatever the method, they get what they need, your royal assent. The documents are signed. Struensee's fate, and Caroline Mathilde's, is sealed with the scrawl of your name. This is a crucial mainstream historical fact. The coup's legitimacy, however thin, rested on obtaining the king's signature for the arrests. Without it, it would have been a far more blatant and risky usurpation. With the signed warrants in hand, the conspirators act swiftly. Soldiers are dispatched through the sleeping palace. Struensee is roused from his bed and arrested. He is reportedly shocked, utterly unprepared for this sudden turn of events. One moment he is the most powerful man in Denmark, the next, he is a prisoner. His confidence shatters. Count Brandt is also arrested, likely putting up more of a fight, given his temperament, but ultimately subdued. Then comes the arrest of Queen Caroline Mathilde. This is perhaps the most dramatic and poignant moment of the coup. She is awakened in her chambers, not by her attendants, but by soldiers. She is informed that she is under arrest by order of you, her husband, the king. Imagine her terror, her confusion, her outrage. She knows immediately what this means, not just for Struensee, but for herself and her children, especially the little Princess Louise Augusta, whose parentage is now an open weapon against her. She reportedly tries to resist, to reason with her captors, to demand to see you. But it's no use. The orders are clear. She is a prisoner of state. One quirky, or rather, heartbreaking, detail often recounted is her desperate concern for her children, pleading to know what will become of them. Her pleas largely fall on deaf ears in the cold efficiency of the coup. The arrests are carried out with military precision. By dawn, the key figures of the Struensee regime are all in custody. The city of Copenhagen wakes up to the astonishing news: the German doctor who ruled Denmark is overthrown. The Queen is imprisoned. Power has shifted dramatically overnight. There are cheers in some quarters, particularly from the nobility and clergy who felt disenfranchised and offended by Struensee's rule. There is also confusion and fear among others who had supported the reforms or who simply dread instability. Propaganda, likely orchestrated by Goldberg and his faction, begins to circulate immediately, justifying the coup, painting Struensee as a villain and a usurper, and emphasizing the restoration of the rightful order under your authority, King Christian, though everyone knows the real power now lies with Juliana Maria and her circle. You, King Christian, are paraded out as the liberated monarch, saved from the clutches of an evil advisor. You might even believe it, in your more malleable moments. Or perhaps you are simply relieved that the pressure, the constant maneuvering around Struensee, is over, replaced by a new set of handlers. The whirlwind of the Struensee era, with its radical reforms and scandalous affairs, has come to a crashing, sudden halt. The Danish Enlightenment, as orchestrated by him, is over. A new, more conservative chapter is about to begin, and the fates of Struensee and Caroline Mathilde hang precariously in the balance. The speed and success of the coup are remarkable, a testament to the careful planning of the conspirators and perhaps, to Struensee's own fatal overconfidence. The king imprisoned by his own throne now has new jailers. The dust from the overnight coup is still settling over Copenhagen, but there's a new, chilling order in the air. Struensee, the man who just days ago held the reins of an entire kingdom, now sits in a cold cell in the Kastellet, Copenhagen's imposing fortress. His friend and accomplice in many a strange royal shenanigan, Count Enevold Brandt, is imprisoned nearby. Queen Caroline Mathilde is under heavily guarded house arrest at Kronborg Castle, yes, that Kronborg, the one Shakespeare made famous as Elsinore in Hamlet. It's a suitably dramatic, if grim, setting for a queen accused of treason and adultery. You, King Christian, are once again the centerpiece of a new political constellation, officially restored to your full authority, though in reality, you're more of a puppet king than ever, now with Queen Dowager Juliana Maria and Ove Heg Goldberg pulling the strings. It's like you've just swapped one set of overly enthusiastic personal assistants for another, slightly more old-fashioned, set. The new regime wastes no time in dismantling Struensee's legacy. His reforms are systematically rolled back. His supporters are purged from government. A wave of conservative reaction washes over Denmark. But their most pressing task is to deal with Struensee himself. He can't simply be allowed to disappear. His downfall needs to be public, decisive, and a terrifying warning to anyone else who might harbor radical ideas or ambitions above their station. The man who championed freedom of the press is about to become the subject of a state-orchestrated media campaign of vilification. It's a bit ironic, like a vegan butcher setting up shop. Struensee's interrogation begins almost immediately. He's subjected to intense questioning, psychological pressure, and, though accounts vary and it was officially abolished by his own decree, some historians still debate whether he faced physical coercion or the threat of it. The primary goal of his interrogators is to secure a full confession, not just to political overreach, but to the crime of lèse-majesté, an offense against the sovereign, which, in this context, heavily involved his intimate relationship with Queen Caroline Mathilde. They need to prove he didn't just advise you, King Christian, badly. They need to show he criminally usurped your authority and dishonored your marriage bed. This is crucial for legitimizing the coup and for justifying the harsh punishment they intend to mete out. Initially, Struensee tries to defend his actions, arguing that his reforms were for the good of Denmark, that he acted with your consent. But he's isolated, broken, and probably terrified. The full weight of the state is bearing down on him. Eventually, he confesses. He admits to usurping royal power and, crucially, to his affair with Caroline Mathilde. His confession is detailed and damning, likely extracted under immense duress. It's exactly what his enemies need. Enevold Brandt, also under interrogation, confesses to his own share of misdeeds, including those bizarre instances of striking you, King Christian, which are now painted not as strange consensual acts, if they ever truly were, but as assaults on the royal person. With confessions in hand, the trial is a foregone conclusion. It's a show trial, designed to publicly condemn Struensee and legitimize the new government. A special commission is appointed to try him and Brandt. The charges are numerous and severe: usurpation of royal authority, embezzlement, though this was a weaker charge, and the capital offense of criminal intimacy with the Queen. This last charge is the most sensational and the one that seals his fate. The mainstream historical fact is that Struensee was formally charged and found guilty of majesтэtsforbrydelser, lèse-majesté, and various abuses of power. His legal defense is perfunctory, almost non-existent in the face of the overwhelming political will to see him convicted. The verdict, when it comes, is guilty on all significant counts. The sentence is death. And not just a simple death. The court, eager to make an example of him, decrees a particularly brutal and archaic form of execution, designed to inflict maximum suffering and public humiliation. First, his right hand, the hand that signed the decrees and, symbolically, the hand that touched the queen, is to be cut off. Then, he is to be beheaded. Finally, his body is to be drawn and quartered, and the remains displayed publicly on breaking wheels as a warning. It's a sentence straight out of the medieval playbook, a stark contrast to the enlightened ideals Struensee himself had tried to implement. Brant receives the same sentence. It's a clear message: this is what happens to those who dare to overreach, who challenge the established order, who bring foreign ideas and moral laxity to the Danish court. The execution is set for April 28, 1772, just over 3 months after the coup. It's a public spectacle, held on a large field outside Copenhagen, attended by thousands. People flock to see the mighty fallen, a morbid curiosity mixed with a state-encouraged sense of righteous anger. You, King Christian, are spared the sight, of course. You are kept away, though the news of the day's events will undoubtedly reach you. Perhaps you feel a flicker of something: relief, fear, confusion, or perhaps nothing at all, just the usual hum of the voices in your head. One particularly grim and often cited quirky detail from the execution scene is the behavior of the crowd. There are reports of vendors selling food and drink, of a grimly festive atmosphere, as people jostled for a better view. It highlights the rather different public sensibilities of the 18th century regarding such spectacles. It wasn't just a punishment, it was a form of gruesome entertainment, a morality play enacted in blood. Get your Struensee execution snacks here. Freshly dismembered, metaphorically speaking. Okay, maybe not that last bit, but you get the idea. Brant is executed first. Then it's Struensee's turn. He reportedly meets his end with a degree of composure, perhaps resigned to his fate, or perhaps clinging to some last vestige of the rationalism he so admired. The sentence is carried out with brutal efficiency. The hand is severed. The axe falls. His brief, meteoric career, his dreams of an enlightened Denmark, all end in a pool of blood on a public scaffold. His dismembered body is then displayed as planned, a gruesome testament to the power of the restored conservative order. The execution of Struensee is a pivotal moment. It's a brutal and unequivocal rejection of his reforms and his methods. It sends a chill through anyone who might have sympathized with his cause. The era of Enlightenment experimentation in Denmark is definitively over, replaced by a period of staunch traditionalism and a tightening of aristocratic and clerical control, all under the watchful eyes of Queen Dowager Juliana Maria and Ove Guldberg. Struensee's shadow, once so dominant, now becomes the shadow of a martyr for some, and a cautionary tale for all. His name will be whispered for generations, a symbol of both the promise and the perils of radical change. With Struensee and Brant dispatched in such a gruesome and public fashion, the new regime, fronted by Queen Dowager Juliana Maria and the formidable Ove Guldberg, has firmly stamped its authority on Denmark. The blood on the executioner's platform is a stark full stop to the Enlightenment chapter Struensee had so audaciously tried to write. But there's still the rather delicate matter of Queen Caroline Mathilde. She's still a queen, even if a disgraced and imprisoned one. She's also the sister of King George III of Great Britain, a not insignificant detail on the international stage. They can't exactly give her the same axe and quartering treatment, much as some of the more fire-breathing conservatives might have wished. That would be a diplomatic incident of epic proportions. Dear King George, about your sister, we had a bit of a mishap with an axe. Our sincerest apologies. Do you still want that trade deal? Yeah, not going to fly. So, while Struensee was facing his brutal end, Caroline Mathilde remained confined at Kronborg Castle, her future hanging in the balance. Her initial shock and terror following her arrest had likely given way to a gnawing anxiety and a profound sense of betrayal. She had staked everything on Struensee, her heart, her reputation, her influence, and now he was gone, and she was left to face the wrath of his enemies, who were also, by extension, her enemies. She knows her position is precarious. The confession extracted from Struensee, detailing their affair, is a powerful weapon against her. The new rulers of Denmark move to formally dissolve your marriage, King Christian. The legal grounds are, of course, her confessed adultery with Struensee. It's a relatively swift process, given the political will behind it. Your marriage, which had been a source of misery and dysfunction for years, is officially annulled in April 1772, even before Struensee's execution. You, King Christian, are now technically a bachelor again, though your mental state makes any prospect of a new marriage and a more stable personal life highly unlikely. You are, as ever, a pawn in their game, your name used to legitimize their actions. Perhaps you barely register the annulment, another strange document signed, another shift in the ever-changing cast of characters around you. The most devastating blow for Caroline Mathilde, however, is the decision regarding her children. She is to be stripped of her title as Queen of Denmark and, most cruelly, she is to be permanently separated from her son, Crown Prince Frederick, and her daughter, Princess Louise Augusta. This is a mainstream historical fact. A condition of her divorce and banishment was that she would never see her children again. Imagine the agony of that. Frederick, your heir, is now about 4 years old. Little Louise Augusta, widely believed to be Struensee's child, is not yet even a year old. To be denied any future contact with them is a punishment arguably more painful than any physical torment. Her children are her last remaining connection to the life she once knew, however flawed it was. Now, even that is being severed. Negotiations take place between the Danish government and her brother, King George III of Great Britain. The British are, understandably, concerned for her safety and dignity. They are not pleased with how their princess, the Queen of Denmark, has been treated. But Denmark holds most of the cards, particularly with Caroline Mathilde's confessed adultery. A compromise is eventually reached. She will not be imprisoned indefinitely in Denmark, nor will she be subjected to further public humiliation. Instead, she will be exiled. The chosen place for her exile is Celle Castle, in the electorate of Hanover, which was conveniently ruled in personal union by her brother, the British king. It's a sort of gilded cage, a comfortable but inescapable exile. So, in May 1772, shortly after Struensee's execution, Caroline Mathilde, no longer Queen of Denmark, just a 20-year-old woman stripped of her titles, her husband, such as he was, and her children, boards a British frigate. She leaves Denmark, the country she had arrived in with such youthful hope just 6 years earlier, never to return. As the Danish coastline recedes, she must have felt an overwhelming sense of grief, loss, and perhaps a bitter resentment. She had tried to find happiness, to effect change, and it had all ended in utter disaster. Her life in Celle is one of quiet melancholy. It's a small, provincial court, a far cry from the intrigues of Copenhagen or the grandeur of the British royal family. She is treated with respect due to her birth, but she is, in essence, a prisoner of her circumstances. She has a household, she can receive visitors, but she is under surveillance, and her movements are restricted. One quirky, though poignant, detail of her exile is that she reportedly spent a great deal of time writing letters, many of them pleading for news of her children or expressing her sorrow. She also apparently created a small garden, perhaps finding some solace in tending to it, a small patch of life she could control in a life otherwise dictated by others. She became known for her charitable works in Celle, perhaps trying to find some meaning in her constrained existence. Well, if I can't reform a kingdom, at least I can make sure these orphans get some decent soup. Historians still debate whether there were any serious plots or considerations to try and restore Caroline Mathilde, perhaps as regent for her son. Some exiled Danes and sympathetic figures in Britain may have entertained such ideas, but they never came to fruition. She was too isolated, and the political climate in Denmark under Juliana Maria and Guldberg was too firmly entrenched against her. Her health, perhaps always delicate and certainly not helped by years of stress, unhappiness, and then the profound grief of her exile and separation from her children, begins to decline. she lives in cell for only 3 years. In May 1775, Caroline Mathilde dies suddenly, likely from scarlet fever or a similar infectious disease, though some contemporary whispers, a common feature of royal deaths, hinted at poison or suicide, for which there's no real evidence. She is only 23 years old. A life that began with the promise of a crown ended in lonely exile, her name forever linked with scandal, tragedy, and a brief, tumultuous period of attempted revolution. Her story serves as a stark reminder of the precariousness of power and the often brutal consequences for women who dared to step outside the rigid confines of 18th-century royal expectations. Your queen, the one you barely knew how to be a husband to, is gone, another casualty of the turbulent times and the unique challenges of your reign. The news of Caroline Mathilde's death in distant cell reaches Copenhagen. You are, by this point, 26 years old. Your former queen, the young woman who was briefly your wife and the mother of your heir, is gone. How does this news register with you, King Christian? Does it penetrate the fog of your mental landscape? Perhaps there's a fleeting moment of sadness, a dim recollection of a pretty, unhappy girl. Or perhaps it's just another piece of information that drifts through your consciousness, unanchored, quickly lost in the swirling currents of your thoughts. Your son, Crown Prince Frederick, is now 7 years old, motherless, his early life already overshadowed by the immense drama and tragedy that has engulfed his parents. He's being carefully groomed by the new regime, his education overseen by those who now hold the true power in Denmark. And what of your power, King Christian? Well, officially, you are still the absolute monarch. Your name is on every law, every decree. Coins bear your likeness. Foreign ambassadors present their credentials to you. But in reality, you are a king in name only, a figurehead propped up to legitimize the rule of others. The real decision-makers are your stepmother, Queen Dowager Juliana Maria, her son, your half-brother, Prince Frederick, and the astute, conservative Ove Goldberg. This triumvirate, having successfully orchestrated the downfall of Struensee and Caroline Mathilde, now governs Denmark. They are the architects of what's often called the Goldberg era. It's like you're the lead singer of a band who only lip-syncs while the manager and the songwriter run everything from behind the curtain. Your daily life settles into a strange, carefully managed routine. You reside primarily in Christiansborg Palace, or sometimes Fredensborg or Hirschholm, the settings of earlier, more tumultuous chapters of your life. You are surrounded by attendants, by courtiers loyal to the new regime, whose job is less about serving you and more about managing you, keeping you occupied, and ensuring you don't do anything too unexpected. Your mental condition remains profoundly unstable. There are periods of agitation, of deep melancholy, of childlike behavior, interspersed with moments where you might appear surprisingly lucid, even witty, before the clouds descend again. Your routine is designed to be calming, predictable. You might go for supervised walks in the palace gardens. You attend carefully orchestrated state councils where your role is largely to listen, or appear to listen, and then to sign the documents placed before you by Goldberg or another minister. The actual debate and decision-making have already happened elsewhere. Historians still debate the extent of your awareness during these moments. Were you completely oblivious, a mere automaton signing papers? Or did you have glimpses of understanding, a frustrating awareness of your own powerlessness? It's a question that likely can never be fully answered, lost within the complexities of your illness. There are accounts of you engaging in simple pleasures. You apparently retained a love for the theater, and private performances were sometimes arranged for your amusement. Perhaps in the world of make-believe, you found a temporary escape from the confusing reality of your own life. You also had a fondness for certain types of repetitive activities. One somewhat quirky, apocryphal tidbit suggests you developed an obsession with meticulously polishing your collection of medals and decorations, arranging and rearranging them for hours on end. It's a small, sad image, a king reduced to finding order and purpose in the gleaming surfaces of metal trinkets while his kingdom is run by others. If it's true, it's like a form of royal fidget spinning, an attempt to soothe an unquiet mind. Contact with your son, Crown Prince Frederick, is carefully controlled. Juliana Maria and Goldberg are shaping him to be the kind of king they believe Denmark needs: pious, conservative, and respectful of the established order. They likely see you as a cautionary tale, a living example of what happens when a king is allowed to stray. Your interactions with Frederick are probably infrequent and highly supervised, more formal encounters than warm, father-son moments. It's a poignant situation, a father and son, living in the same palace, yet separated by a chasm of illness and political manipulation. The new regime is diligent in its efforts to erase the memory of the Struensee years, or at least to paint it in the darkest possible colors. His reforms are largely reversed. Censorship is reimposed, though perhaps not with the same iron fist as before Struensee's brief liberalization. The privileges of the nobility are restored. The Lutheran state church regains much of its influence. It's a period of conservative retrenchment. Goldberg is a capable administrator, and Denmark enjoys a period of relative peace and neutrality, even as much of Europe is becoming embroiled in conflicts leading up to the American Revolution and later, the Napoleonic Wars. The Goldberg government focused on economic stability and strengthening Danish identity, often through promoting the Danish language over German, which had been very prevalent at court, especially during Struensee's time. This is a mainstream historical fact. Goldberg actively promoted Danish language and culture, a policy that had lasting positive impacts on Danish nationalism. You, meanwhile, are kept largely out of the public eye, except for carefully stage-managed appearances. When you are seen, it's often in a context that reinforces the image of a king who is, shall we say, delicate and in need of guidance. There are stories of you making inappropriate remarks or exhibiting bizarre behavior even during these controlled outings, leading to hurried interventions by your attendants. It must have been exhausting for them, like trying to manage a royal toddler with the vocabulary of a scholar and the impulse control of a caffeinated squirrel. Your personal attendants become crucial figures in your life, almost like a private court within the larger court. They are the ones who deal with your daily needs, your moods, your episodes. Their loyalty is, of course, primarily to the regime that employs them, but perhaps some of them develop a genuine, if weary, affection for the childlike, vulnerable king they care for. You are, after all, not a monster, but a man afflicted by a condition no one in that era truly understood or knew how to treat. There was no therapy, no medication beyond crude sedatives or stimulants. Your prison wasn't just the throne, it was your own mind, and there was no key. Years pass in this manner. The Goldberg regime consolidates its power. Crown Prince Frederick grows from a boy into a young man. And you, King Christian VII, continue your reign in shadow, a ghost in your own palace, a symbol manipulated by those who wield true authority. Your signature still makes laws, but your voice is unheard, your will unexpressed. You are the lonely king on a gilded, empty stage. The machinery of the Danish state grinds on, day after day, year after year, with you, King Christian, as its silent, often oblivious, figurehead. The Goldberg era, as it comes to be known, is in full swing. Ove Heg Goldberg, that shrewd theologian turned statesman, alongside Queen Dowager Juliana Maria and her son, your half-brother Prince Frederick, are the undisputed masters of Denmark. They've successfully turned back the clock, or at least tried to, on the brief, chaotic, and dangerously progressive interlude of Johann Friedrich Struensee. It's like the kingdom took a wild detour down a road marked Radical Enlightenment Freeway, and Goldberg has now firmly wrenched the steering wheel back towards Traditional Values Parkway. No more unexpected exits, thank you very much. This period, stretching from Struensee's dramatic downfall in 1772 until a new power shift in 1784, is characterized by a systematic conservative backlash. The overarching goal is stability, order, and the restoration of traditional Danish values, as defined by Goldberg and his allies, of course. First on the agenda is the Great Undo. Almost all of Struensee's sweeping reforms are either repealed outright or significantly watered down. Remember that glorious, if somewhat chaotic, freedom of the press he introduced? Gone. Censorship is back, though perhaps not quite as stifling as before Struensee, but certainly enough to ensure that no dangerously Struenseean ideas start circulating too freely. The pamphlets and newspapers become decidedly more polite. And by polite, I mean government-approved. Any lingering voices of dissent are quickly and quietly muzzled. The administrative changes Struensee made to streamline the government are also largely reversed. The old councils and bureaucratic structures, with their comfortable sinecures for the nobility, are reinstated. This, naturally, makes the aristocracy very happy. They get their influence back, their titles mean something more again, and those lovely little jobs that didn't require much actual work but paid rather well are back on the table. It's a return to the good old days for the privileged classes. The attempt to centralize power in a cabinet system, which Struensee had used so effectively, is dismantled in favor of more traditional, consensus-based, among the elite, that is, governance. It's slower, more cumbersome, but it keeps the nobles happy, and that's a key part of Goldberg's strategy. Keep the powerful happy, and you keep your power. Socially and culturally, Denmark under Goldberg takes a decidedly conservative turn. The Lutheran state church, which had viewed Struensee's secularizing tendencies with horror, regains much of its former prominence and influence over public life and education. Emphasis is placed on piety, respect for authority, and traditional morality. The somewhat more relaxed, even libertine, atmosphere that had briefly flourished under Struensee and Caroline Mathilde, particularly at court, is firmly suppressed. Think less risqué French novels and philosophical debates, and more sermons and sober patriotic hymns. It's not exactly a barrel of laughs, but it's orderly. One mainstream historical fact is that Goldberg's government passed the Law of Indigenous Rights, Indfødsretten, in 1776. This law stipulated that positions in state service should primarily be given to native-born Danes, or Norwegians and Holsteiners, a move designed to prevent foreigners, like Struensee, ahem, from gaining undue influence. This was a popular measure that tapped into a growing sense of Danish national identity. While many of Struensee's reforms were undone, some, particularly those that were seen as practical and not ideologically threatening, were quietly kept or modified. It wasn't a complete rollback to the pre-Struensee era, but rather a selective pruning. The focus is on prudent, cautious governance, avoiding any radical experiments. Goldberg is no fool. He knows that some modernization is inevitable, but he wants it on his terms, controlled and gradual. Historians still debate the long-term economic impact of the Goldberg administration. Some argue that its cautious policies and emphasis on neutrality allowed Denmark to prosper peacefully, especially as other European powers were increasingly embroiled in expensive wars. Others suggest that its conservatism stifled innovation and delayed necessary social and economic reforms. And what about you, King Christian, amidst all this conservative re-engineering of your kingdom? You continue your spectral existence. You sign the decrees that dismantle the work of the man who once held your mind and your queen's heart. You preside over a court that is now the epitome of stiff formality, a far cry from the chaotic energy of your youth or the brief, heady days of Struensee's ascendancy. Perhaps you notice the change in atmosphere, the different faces around you, the hushed tones. Or perhaps it all just blends into the general tapestry of your internal world. Your routine remains much the same, carefully managed appearances, long periods of isolation or engagement in simple, repetitive tasks. The stories of your erratic behavior continue, though they are more carefully contained now, less public. One apocryphal tale that sometimes surfaces from this period is that you developed a habit of talking to the portraits of your ancestors, seeking their counsel or perhaps just enjoying a one-sided conversation where no one argued back. So, great-grandfather Frederick IV, about these new tax laws, you think Goldberg is being a tad stingy? It's a sad, lonely image, if true, a king seeking solace in silent, painted figures. The education of your son, Crown Prince Frederick, is a top priority for Goldberg and Juliana Maria. He is being molded into their ideal of a future king, devout, disciplined, and deeply Danish. He is kept largely separate from you, lest your instability somehow influence him. This separation must be a strange thing for a boy growing up in the same palace as his father but rarely interacting with him in any meaningful way. He is taught to revere the monarchy, to respect the church, and to be wary of the kind of radical ideas that led to the Struensee catastrophe. The lesson is clear: what happened under your early reign must never happen again. Denmark under Goldberg is a kingdom trying to heal, or at least to paper over, the deep divisions and scandals of the recent past. It's a period of enforced calm, of looking inward, of strengthening what are perceived to be core Danish values. But beneath the surface of this conservative order, the seeds of future change are inevitably stirring. The Enlightenment ideas that Struensee championed, though suppressed, haven't entirely disappeared. And your son, Crown Prince Frederick, is growing up. Soon, he will be old enough to have ideas of his own, and he might not be content to remain a pawn in Goldberg's game forever. The quiet kingdom is perhaps just holding its breath. The years under Ove Heg Goldberg's steady, conservative hand have brought a kind of calm to Denmark, a distinct lack of the fireworks that characterized the Struensee period. You, King Christian, continue to drift through your days, a living phantom in your own palaces, your signature still the official seal of approval on all state business, though everyone knows the thoughts and decisions originate elsewhere. Queen Dowager Juliana Maria and Goldberg have created a stable, if somewhat stuffy, environment. But time, as it always does, marches on, and the most significant development during these outwardly quiet years is the steady maturation of your son, Crown Prince Frederick. He's no longer the little boy caught in the crossfire of his parents' tragic drama. He's growing into a young man, and unlike you, he's showing every sign of being a very capable, and very determined, future ruler. Frederick's upbringing has been meticulously managed by the Goldberg regime. He's been drilled in the virtues of piety, duty, and Danish patriotism. He's witnessed firsthand the consequences of what they presented as your disastrous early reign and the Struensee affair. The lesson he's supposed to have learned is that radicalism is bad, foreign influence is suspect, and a strong, conservative hand is needed to guide the state. However, they might have underestimated the young prince. While he's certainly absorbed the lessons of caution, he's also developed a keen mind of his own, and perhaps a growing awareness that the current government, while stable, isn't necessarily dynamic or entirely in touch with the changing times. Or maybe he just got tired of being told what to do by his grandmother and a very stern theologian. Teenagers, even royal ones, can be like that. As Frederick approaches his 16th birthday in 1784, the age at which he would traditionally be considered of age and eligible to take his seat on the state council, the political atmosphere begins to subtly shift. There's a new player on the board, one with a direct claim to power, and he's not content to be a mere figurehead like his father. He's observed the workings of the Goldberg government, the way they use your authority, King Christian, to enact their policies. He's seen how they've marginalized your role, effectively ruling in your name while you are, for all intents and purposes, a state prisoner. Perhaps he feels a sense of duty to restore some agency to the crown, even if it's his own agency exercised in your name. Or perhaps he just wants the top job. A new group of reform-minded nobles and officials begins to coalesce around the young crown prince. These are not wild-eyed radicals like Struensee, but they are men who believe that Denmark needs to move forward, that some of Goldberg's conservative policies are holding the country back. Figures like Andreas Peter Bernstorff, a seasoned diplomat who had been dismissed by Goldberg, and Christian Ditlev Reventlow, a different Reventlow from your harsh childhood tutor, this one a proponent of agricultural reform, see in Frederick an opportunity to steer Denmark back towards a more progressive path, albeit a more cautiously navigated one than Struensee's ill-fated sprint. They start to discreetly advise the young prince, fueling his ambitions and perhaps his frustrations with the current regime. The Goldberg government, particularly Queen Dowager Juliana Maria, is aware of this stirring. They try to keep Frederick under their thumb, to delay his full entry into power. But it's a difficult game to play. He's the crown prince, your heir, King Christian, and he's popular. The mainstream historical fact is that on April 14, 1784, shortly after his 16th birthday and his confirmation, Crown Prince Frederick staged what was essentially a palace coup, a bloodless but decisive power grab. It was meticulously planned. During a session of the State Council, with you, King Christian, presiding in your usual detached manner, Frederick boldly presents a document for your signature. This document effectively dismisses Goldberg and his key ministers and transfers power to a new council headed by Frederick himself, acting as regent. Imagine the scene. You're sitting there, perhaps idly tracing patterns on the table or lost in some internal reverie. Suddenly, your son, this serious young man, is standing before you, papers in hand, asking for your signature. He's firm, he's clear. Goldberg and Juliana Maria are probably present, aghast, trying to intervene. But Frederick has planned well. He has the support of key military officers and influential members of the council. Historians still debate how much you, King Christian, understood of what was happening. Did Frederick explain it to you in simple terms? Did you just sign because your son asked you to, a rare moment of paternal connection, however manipulated? Or did you just sign because it was another piece of paper, and signing papers was what you did? Oh, another one? Right then, where's the ink? Good boy, Frederick, always so industrious. Whatever your level of comprehension, you sign. And just like that, with a stroke of your pen, the Goldberg era ends. It's a stunning reversal. Goldberg, who had so skillfully managed your authority for over a decade, is now out. Queen Dowager Juliana Maria, who had been the power behind the throne, sees her influence shattered. They are effectively retired from public life. It's a much quieter, more dignified exit than Struensee's, but an exit nonetheless. Frederick is now the Regent of Denmark, ruling in your name. He's only 16, but he's shown remarkable political acumen and ruthlessness. It's like a corporate takeover, but with crowns and royal decrees instead of stock options and boardroom battles. One quirky, apocryphal story related to this coup suggests that Goldberg, upon realizing what was happening, tried to physically prevent you from signing, only to be gently but firmly pushed aside by one of Frederick's military supporters. True or not, it paints a vivid picture of the tension and the sudden shift of power in that council chamber. It's a clear signal that a new era has dawned. For you, King Christian, life probably doesn't change all that much on a day-to-day basis. You are still king in name. You still have your routines, your attendants. But now, the person issuing the orders, the one whose will is being enacted through your signature, is your own son. Perhaps there's a subtle shift in the atmosphere around you. Maybe Frederick treats you with a different kind of respect, or perhaps a different kind of careful management. He is, after all, your son, and despite everything, there's a blood tie that can't be denied. He now bears the burden of ruling a kingdom while also managing a mentally ill father who is, nominally, his sovereign. It's a heavy load for a young man, but Frederick seems ready for the challenge. Denmark is about to embark on a new period of reform, this time led by a prince of its own blood, who learned some hard lessons from the past but is determined to shape the future. So, your son, Crown Prince Frederick, is now firmly in charge. At the tender age of 16, he's orchestrated a bloodless coup, ousted the old guard of Goldberg and your stepmother, Juliana Maria, and taken the reins of Denmark as Prince Regent. All, of course, in your name, King Christian. You continue to be the official sovereign, your signature the stamp of royal authority, even if everyone knows the real decisions are being made by this remarkably capable and determined young man. It's a new chapter for Denmark, one that will be dominated not by internal court dramas and psychological struggles, but by the colossal, earth-shattering events unfolding across Europe, the French Revolution and the subsequent Napoleonic Wars. It's like your family drama suddenly got upgraded from a local theater production to a massive international blockbuster with explosions and shifting alliances. Under Frederick's regency, Denmark initially tries to maintain a policy of armed neutrality. This had been a fairly successful strategy for smaller nations in previous European conflicts, allowing them to continue trading with all sides and, hopefully, avoid being dragged into the fighting. For a maritime nation like Denmark, with significant shipping interests, this is a particularly attractive option. You guys fight all you want, the policy basically says, we're just here to sell stuff to everyone and stay out of trouble. It's a sensible approach, but the scale and ferocity of the Napoleonic Wars will test this neutrality to its absolute limit, and then some. As France, under the revolutionary government and then Napoleon Bonaparte, goes to war with pretty much everyone else in Europe, particularly Great Britain, Denmark finds itself in an increasingly precarious position. Both Britain and France want to control maritime trade and prevent neutral nations from supplying their enemies. Denmark, with its sizable merchant fleet and its strategic control over the entrance to the Baltic Sea, becomes a key pawn in their great power chess game. It's like being the kid with the only good football in the neighborhood when two rival gangs both want to use it, exclusively. Things are bound to get tense. You, King Christian, are largely insulated from these growing international pressures. Your days continue in their carefully managed pattern. You sign the documents Frederick and his ministers put before you, declarations of neutrality, trade agreements, perhaps even mobilization orders, likely with little comprehension of their momentous implications. While Frederick is wrestling with complex diplomatic negotiations and the threat of war, you might be more concerned with the arrangement of your medals or the script of the play being performed for you that evening. The disconnect between the nominal ruler and the actual ruler has never been more stark, or perhaps more necessary, given the gravity of the situation. The first major crisis arrives in 1801. Great Britain, deeply suspicious that Denmark's neutrality is favoring France and concerned about the Danish fleet potentially falling into French hands, decides to take action. A British fleet under the command of Admiral Sir Hyde Parker, with Vice Admiral Horatio Nelson as his second-in-command, yes, that Nelson, sails to Copenhagen. Their demand is simple: Denmark must abandon its armed neutrality policy and effectively side with Britain. Frederick, understandably, refuses. He's not about to let Denmark be bullied. The result is the First Battle of Copenhagen, in April 1801. This is a fierce naval engagement fought right in Copenhagen harbor. The Danish fleet, though outmatched, puts up a valiant defense. Nelson famously, and perhaps apocryphally, as with many Nelson stories, put his telescope to his blind eye when ordered by Parker to disengage, insisting he didn't see the signal. Retreat? What retreat? My good eye seems to be on holiday today, best press on, A ceasefire is eventually negotiated, but not before significant losses on both sides. Denmark is forced to temporarily suspend its armed neutrality. It's a brutal lesson in the realities of power politics. Your capital city has been attacked, your sailors killed, all while you, the king, are a helpless bystander in your own kingdom. Historians still debate whether Frederick could have avoided this conflict through different diplomatic maneuvers, or if British determination to neutralize the Danish fleet made it inevitable. For a few years, a fragile peace holds. Denmark tries to navigate the treacherous waters between Britain and Napoleonic France. Frederick focuses on internal reforms. He's actually quite a progressive ruler in many ways, overseeing significant agricultural reforms that improve the lives of Danish peasants, a legacy far more positive than many of Struensee's flashes in the pan. But the shadow of Napoleon looms ever larger. By 1807, Napoleon is at the height of his power on the continent. He issues the Berlin Decree, establishing the Continental System, which aims to cripple Britain by closing all European ports to British trade. Denmark is once again caught in the middle. Britain, fearing that Napoleon will force Denmark to close its ports and, more critically, seize the Danish fleet for an invasion of Britain, decides on a preemptive strike. This time, they don't bother with warnings. In August 1807, a massive British force lands near Copenhagen and besieges the city. When the Danes refuse to surrender their fleet, the British unleash a terrifying bombardment of the civilian population, one of the first instances of deliberate terror bombing of a European city in modern warfare. For 3 nights, shells and Congreve rockets, a new and terrifying incendiary weapon, rain down on Copenhagen. Large parts of the city are destroyed, hundreds of civilians are killed. It's an act of shocking brutality. You, King Christian, are in the city during this bombardment, though likely moved to a secure location. Imagine the terror, the noise, the fires. It must have been an apocalyptic experience, even for someone accustomed to the chaos of their own mind. Faced with such overwhelming force and the horrific suffering of his people, Frederick has no choice but to capitulate. The Danish fleet, the pride of the nation, is surrendered to the British. This is a mainstream historical fact. The bombardment of Copenhagen and the seizure of the Danish fleet in 1807 is a pivotal and traumatic event in Danish history. It's a national humiliation, and it forces Denmark, reluctantly and disastrously, into an alliance with Napoleonic France. There's really no other option left. Britain has made an enemy of Denmark, and Napoleon is the only powerful ally available. The consequences are devastating. Denmark is now on the losing side of the Napoleonic Wars. Its trade is crippled by the British blockade. Norway, which had been united with Denmark for centuries, will eventually be lost. It's a period of immense hardship and national decline. Frederick, the once promising regent, is now leading a nation through its darkest hours, all under your increasingly faint and distant authority, King Christian. The weight on his shoulders must be immense, a far cry from the relatively simple internal power struggles that defined the earlier parts of your reign. The echoes of Struensee's ambitions and your own youthful follies seem like ancient history compared to the thunder of cannons and the fall of empires. The smoke from the British bombardment of Copenhagen in 1807 has barely cleared, and the psychological scars on the city and the nation are deep. Denmark, under the reluctant leadership of your son, Crown Prince Frederick, now finds itself shackled to Napoleon's France, an unwilling ally in a devastating global conflict. The once proud Danish fleet is gone, captured by the British. The economy is in tatters. The future looks bleak. And you, King Christian VII, now approaching your late 50s, are fading into the twilight of your long, strange reign, your mind drifting further and further from the grim realities your kingdom faces. It's as if the immense turmoil of the outside world is inversely proportional to your engagement with it. The louder the cannons roar, the quieter your already muted presence becomes. Your final years, from this catastrophic turning point in 1807 until your death in early 1808, are marked by an accelerating decline, both mental and physical. The restless energy, the flashes of erratic brilliance or disturbing mania that characterized your youth and middle age, seem to be dimming, replaced by a more profound lethargy, a deeper retreat into the recesses of your own consciousness. The world outside, a world of war, of national crisis, of your son Frederick grappling with impossible choices, barely seems to penetrate. You are an old man now, by the standards of the time, worn down by a lifetime of mental illness and the peculiar burdens of a kingship you never truly possessed. You spend most of your time in a carefully controlled environment, likely at one of the royal residences slightly removed from the immediate chaos of the capital, perhaps Friedensborg Palace or, fittingly enough for your final days, Rendsburg in Schleswig, which was then part of your domains and further from the direct line of British naval power. Your attendants, fewer in number now perhaps, given the straitened circumstances of the kingdom, continue their duties, managing your needs, shielding you from shocks, and ensuring the pretense of your reign is maintained. The signing of documents continues, though your hand might be weaker, your signature more tremulous. Frederick brings you papers, war measures, emergency decrees, letters of state reflecting Denmark's desperate alliance with Napoleon. You sign them. It's the last vestige of your royal function, this almost mechanical act of Pridaishchi Silu, Russian for giving force/power to, a little nod to the shifting alliances perhaps, or just a random thought floating by. What goes on in your mind during these final months? Do you have moments of clarity, fleeting glimpses of the disaster that has befallen Denmark? Does the sound of distant cannons or the news of battles register in any meaningful way? Or is your world populated by the ghosts of your past, your stern tutor Reventlow, your tragic mother Louise, the vivacious Caroline Mathilde, the charismatic but ultimately doomed Struensee? Perhaps these figures are more real to you now than the grim-faced ministers or your overburdened son. Historians still debate the precise nature and progression of your mental illness, often referred to broadly as schizophrenia or a similar condition, but the end result was a profound detachment from reality. One poignant, if perhaps embellished, anecdote from this period describes you occasionally asking your attendants for news of people long dead, or confusing current events with incidents from your childhood. It's the kind of disorientation that underscores the depth of your decline, a mind unmoored from time and circumstance. Is Struensee coming to play chess today, you might ask, decades after his brutal execution? Your attendants would have learned to navigate these moments with gentle deflections and sad understanding. Your physical health also deteriorates. A lifetime of irregular habits, stress, even if not always consciously processed, and the rudimentary medical care of the era take their toll. You are likely frail, perhaps suffering from various age-related ailments that are exacerbated by your mental condition. Your son, Frederick, now bears the full weight of the kingdom on his shoulders. He is not just regent, he is, in every practical sense, the king. He has to manage a failing war effort, a collapsing economy, and the welfare of his people, all while also dealing with an increasingly incapacitated father who is still, technically, his sovereign. The strain on him must be immense. One can only imagine the complex emotions he must feel towards you: pity, frustration, perhaps a lingering, filial duty. He's essentially been the adult in the relationship since he was a teenager. The political situation for Denmark is dire. Allied with Napoleon, Denmark is squarely in Britain's crosshairs. The British Navy blockades Danish ports, strangling trade. The state is effectively bankrupt. There's a real sense of crisis, of a nation struggling for survival. And in the midst of this, you, King Christian, are slowly, quietly, slipping away. It's a stark contrast, the macro-level chaos of a nation at war, and the micro-level fading of a single, broken mind. The end comes in March 1808. You are in Rendsburg, a town in Schleswig, when you suffer what is reported as a stroke. This is the mainstream historical fact. Christian VII died of a stroke on March 13, 1808, in Rendsburg, at the age of 59. Given your long history of ill health, both mental and physical, it's perhaps not an unexpected end. There are no grand deathbed pronouncements, no final lucid moments of regal wisdom. Just the quiet extinguishing of a troubled life. The man who was born a prince, who became a king at 17, who presided over one of the most scandalous and reform-minded periods in Danish history, and then faded into decades of figurehead rule, is finally at peace. Your death, in a way, is a formality. Frederick has been the de facto ruler for so long. But it is still a significant moment. The reign of Christian VII, the king imprisoned by his throne and his mind, is officially over. Crown Prince Frederick is now King Frederick VI, not just in practice, but in name as well. He inherits a kingdom in desperate straits, a kingdom that your reign, through its many strange twists and turns, helped to shape, for better and for worse. The fading light of your life gives way to the harsh glare of a new royal era, one born amidst war and uncertainty. And so, the curtain falls. You, Christian VII, King of Denmark and Norway, the Wends and the Goths, Duke of Schleswig, Holstein, Stormarn, and Dithmarschen, Count of Oldenburg and Delmenhorst, are dead. March 1808. Rendsburg. A stroke. The official pronouncements are made, the bells toll, and your son, Frederick, is now King Frederick VI in his own right, no longer needing the preface, Crown Prince Regent. He inherits a crown, yes, but also a kingdom in profound crisis, battered by the Napoleonic Wars, economically devastated, and on the verge of losing Norway. Not exactly a walk in the Rosenborg Gardens. Your passing, while significant as the formal end of a reign, doesn't drastically alter the day-to-day governance of Denmark. That power had slipped from your grasp decades earlier, first into the ambitious hands of Struensee, then the conservative grip of Guldberg and Juliana Maria, and finally into the capable, if overburdened, stewardship of your own son. But now, as your physical presence is removed from the world, it's time for the historians, and indeed your people, to begin sifting through the wreckage and the occasional surprising treasure of your nearly 42-year reign. What, then, is the legacy of Christian VII, the king who wore a crown but was so rarely its master? It's complex, to say the least. You are remembered, perhaps inevitably, primarily for your mental illness. You are the Mad King of Denmark, a figure of tragedy, sometimes ridicule, and a deep, unsettling pathos. Your story becomes a cautionary tale, a dramatic illustration of what can happen when the immense pressures of absolute monarchy collide with a fragile psyche in an era that had no understanding of, or effective treatment for, mental health conditions. It's easy to imagine playwrights and novelists salivating over the dramatic potential: the young, erratic king, the scandalous queen, the scheming doctor, the court intrigues. Your life was ready-made melodrama. Coming soon to a theater near you, The King's Unraveling Mind. Get your tickets, it's a wild ride, but maybe leave the kids at home. The brief, incandescent period of Struensee's dominance is inextricably linked to your name. Though he was the architect, you were the authority, however nominal, that allowed his radical Enlightenment reforms to be decreed. That whirlwind of change, freedom of the press, abolition of torture, attempts to dismantle feudal privileges, was revolutionary for its time. And while most of it was quickly undone, the memory lingered. Some historians argue that the Struensee interlude, for all its chaos and tragic end, planted seeds of reform that would eventually blossom in Denmark in the 19th century. Others contend it was a disastrous overreach that set back genuine progress by provoking such a severe conservative backlash. The debate continues: was Struensee, and by extension your reign during his ascendancy, a brief, doomed sunrise of Danish enlightenment or a reckless escapade that ultimately did more harm than good? One mainstream historical fact that often gets highlighted in assessments of your reign is that despite your personal incapacities, the institution of the Danish absolute monarchy itself proved remarkably resilient. It bent, it cracked, it was hijacked and manipulated, but it didn't formally break until much later, in 1849, when Denmark adopted a constitutional monarchy. Your reign demonstrated that the machinery of state could, to a surprising extent, function even with a largely absent monarch at its symbolic head, provided there were strong figures willing and able to wield power in his name. It's a rather backhanded compliment to the system, really. Our bureaucracy is so good, it even works when the boss is indisposed. Then there's the more personal tragedy. You were a captive king in so many ways. Captive to your illness, which distorted your perceptions and governed your moods. Captive to the expectations of your royal birth, a role you were ill-equipped to fulfill. Captive to your advisors, who often used you for their own ends, whether those ends were progressive reform, conservative retrenchment, or simple self-aggrandizement. You rarely, if ever, seem to have been truly free to be yourself, or even to discover who, yourself, might have been without the dual pressures of crown and condition. A quirky or perhaps more sympathetic modern interpretation sometimes frames you as an almost accidental agent of chaos who, by your very instability, exposed the absurdities and vulnerabilities of the absolute monarchy. Your inability to play the part of the wise, decisive ruler inadvertently created spaces for others to try and reshape the kingdom, for better or worse. You were the cracked vessel through which strange new lights, and some rather alarming shadows, poured. It's a, bless his cotton socks, he meant well, probably, kind of view, if you squint hard enough. Your relationship with Caroline Mathilde, and her tragic fate, is another defining element of your legacy. The failure of your marriage, your cruelty towards her, whether born of malice or illness, and the subsequent scandal that led to her exile and early death, cast a long, dark shadow. It's a story of personal failure intertwined with political machination, a poignant reminder of the human cost of royal dysfunction. Princess Louise Augusta, the daughter almost certainly fathered by Struensee but acknowledged by you, went on to marry and have her own family, carrying that complicated lineage forward. One wonders what stories she was told about her parentage. Ultimately, your reign is a study in contrasts, opulence and misery, absolute power and absolute powerlessness, Enlightenment ideals and brutal medieval punishments, grand European tours and the claustrophobic confines of a troubled mind. You presided over a Denmark that experienced dizzying change and then rigid reaction, a kingdom that faced both internal revolution and external assault. You were the still, silent eye of a hurricane of historical forces. Your son, Frederick VI, would go on to rule through the rest of the devastating Napoleonic Wars, oversee the loss of Norway at the Treaty of Kiel in 1814, and then guide Denmark through a long period of post-war recovery and gradual reform. He was a very different king from you, pragmatic, hard-working, and deeply conscious of his duties. Perhaps your life served as a profound, if painful, lesson for him on how not to be a king, or at least, on the perils of a king losing control. You are laid to rest in Roskilde Cathedral, the traditional burial place of Danish monarchs, alongside your ancestors. There you lie, Christian VII, a king who reigned for over 4 decades but perhaps never truly lived a day as a free man. Your story is a quiet reminder that the most gilded cages are sometimes the most confining, and the heaviest crowns are those worn by minds in turmoil. The candles in the grand halls of Christiansborg have long since burned down, their light replaced by the harsher, more revealing glare of historical scrutiny. The echoes of your erratic pronouncements, Christian, the whispers of courtly intrigue, the bold declarations of Struensee, the solemn pronouncements of Guldberg, and the determined commands of your son, Frederick, have all faded into the tapestry of time. What remains is the quiet story of a human being thrust into an extraordinary role, a role for which he was singularly unprepared by temperament and by health. As you drift now, deeper into the soft embrace of sleep, let the complexities and the clamor of that 18th-century Danish court recede. Let the weight of that heavy crown, which was never truly yours to wield, finally be lifted. The struggles, the confusion, the brief flashes of fleeting joy or connection, the long stretches of internal isolation, they are all part of a story that has now been told, a life that has found its place in the long, winding corridors of history. There's a certain peace in understanding that even the most turbulent lives eventually find their quietus, that the most tangled narratives eventually reach their end. Your reign, Christian, was a testament to the unpredictable nature of human existence, even when wrapped in the ermine and gold of royalty. It reminds us that behind every title, every grand historical event, there are individuals grappling with their own unique burdens, their own private battles. Allow the last images of that distant Denmark to soften and blur. The glint of polished silver, the rustle of silk gowns, the scent of beeswax and old paper, the distant sound of a harpsichord playing a melancholic tune, let them all become part of the gentle background hum that lulls you towards rest. There is no more need for anxiety, no more demands, no more expectations. Only the quiet rhythm of your own breathing, the gentle pull of slumber. The captive king is, at long last, free in the kingdom of sleep. Rest now.